Shatakoti Vaishnav Vrindaki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Samveda Bhakta Vrindaki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Napta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right. So if I understand right, we are on Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, text 41. Is that correct? Everybody's muted, right?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. So this verse is about those who are resolute in purpose or Buddhi yoga. So we're learning about Buddhi yoga, and it's related to Vyava Yasatmika Buddh here. So let's go to our verse here. Vyavasayatmika Buddhi Ekeha Kurunandana Bahu Shakha Hiyanantascha Buddhayo Vyavisayanam. So Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Ekeha Kurunandana Bahu Shakha Hiyanantascha Buddhayo Vyavisayanam. So the translation of this verse is those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one, O beloved child of the Kurus. The intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So that's the translation. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one, O beloved child of the Kurus. The intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So this verse is already getting about a beginning of about three verses into a section here of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita um, has several sections, and they are here. We start off with Arjuna's doubts and his surrender, which is the first 9 verses of Bhagavad Gita. Then we have this whole "you're not this body" section from 10 to 20, and for from 21 to 30, pretty much, we have Krishna sort of shaming Arjuna for his hesitancy to do his kshatriya duty. So from 10 to 30, we have, Krishna replying about the body, the soul, and reality. And then, oh, actually, that's from 10 to 30. Then from 31 to 38, that's where Krishna talks about the duty as a kshatriya. And now we're in the fourth section here of chapter 2, which is Buddhi Yoga, which goes from 39 to 53. And then, of course, the last section, section 5, is about transcendentalists. Arjuna asks about transcendentalists, and he asks 4 questions about them, and Krishna answers them. But right now, we're in section 4 on Buddha Yoga, which started with verse 39. So we can look here quickly at verse 39. Let's go back. This is this verse here. Thus far, I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. So we have a contrast here between Buddhi Yoga and Sankhya Yoga. They're actually, in one sense, part of the same system. However, Krishna has described it in one way through analytical study, which he calls Sankhya Yoga. We're going to, we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then after completing that, which was what he did from, verse 10 through, pretty much verse 39, then he starts with, from verse 10 through verse 38. And then with this verse, 239, he begins talking about what he calls Buddhi Yoga. And so we're going to get a contrast between these two things. We have this thing called Buddhi Yoga, and we have this thing called Sankhya. So how do these two things relate to one another? That's the question. And I'm going to start off with talking about that. So Sankhya and Buddhi. Sankhya Yoga means analytical study. Uh, Prabhupada explains that. Sankhya, I think, basically is kind of similar. It might even be etymologically related to the word science. Scantia is the Latin root that science comes from. So it could actually be etymologically related to Sankhya. I'm not sure about that. But at any rate, Sankhya Yoga is an analytical study. An analytical study of what? what Krishna has just explained to Arjuna is the difference between the body and the soul. Arjuna was hesitating to fight. He said he was hesitating to fight because he didn't want to kill his relatives, particularly, Bhishma and Drona, these great warriors who were not only great warriors, but part of his own family. And they had been very helpful to him in his life. So he didn't want to engage in combat with them. So from 10 to 39 to 38, basically, Krishna explained this Sankhya Yoga, as we discussed before, this understanding of you're not the body. The body is going to die for sure. The soul won't die. The soul moves from one body to another, just like, we have, just as we move in boyhood to youth to old age, we will move into another body at death. We find out that for the soul, there is no death, and for the body, there is no uh, persistence. It will vanish at some point or another. We find out that the soul can't be cut, burned, dried, or withered away. We learn all about these different things. We learn that there was never a time when we did not exist, nor Krishna, nor anyone else, that the soul is eternal. The body certainly is not, but the soul is. So all these things were kind of an explanation of this process of the difference between the body and the soul. The body temporary, and it's made of material elements, and the soul is eternal, and it's not made of material elements. So then with this new section, this Buddha Yoga section at verse 39, we find that Buddha Yoga, as Prabhupada describes, it's about controlling the senses. So first, we hear kind of theory, the theory of what is yoga, this Buddha yoga. We hear the theory of what is Sankhya. And Sankhya, in basic terms, is understanding the nature of the body, understanding the nature of the soul. But Buddha yoga is not so much theory and not so much some kind of, you know, information. It's the practice of controlling the senses. And we find that Buddha yoga has different levels. There's kind of a basic version of Buddha yoga, but there is a deeper version of Buddha yoga. And we come to learn later, actually, Prabhupada describes that later on in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, we will hear in 10:10 Buddha Yoga described in full, as Prabhupada says. So here we hear it related, so the verse that we've been talking about here is describing Dadami, I give, Buddha Yogam, I give Buddha Yoga. But in the English translation, we hear, I give the understanding by which we can come to me. So here, Buddha Yoga is a gloss or a reference to the Sanskrit, to the English understanding. So from Buddha Yoga, we get understanding. And we could think of it that way, that Buddha Yoga is a type of understanding. But it's actually more than that. Buddha Yoga is a final break, a final one-pointedness, which is where this, will eventually fit in with the verse that we're discussing today, 241. So in this verse that we're discussing today, Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Ekeha Kurunandana Bahushakha Hyanantascha Buddhayo Vyavasayanam. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one, O beloved child of the Kurus. The intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So we have this comparison between two kinds of understanding. One, which is one pointed, and another, which is many branched. So, what do we mean by one? In what sense is it one? And in what sense are we talking about a many branched understanding? So, there's two kinds of understandings being contrasted here, the one pointed and the many branched. And as we just mentioned, this fits right in with this 10:10. This is Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, 10th verse. Those who are constantly devoted to me with love, I give understanding by which they can come to me. So when someone is constantly, and that's the word there, constantly devoted to Krishna, that means they're one pointed. What is that one point? The one point is, of course, Krishna. That's what the one point is. When we talk about one pointedness, we don't mean one pointed in any kind of way. We mean one pointed in a particular way, one pointed in focus on Krishna. So that's the nature of this one pointedness. And people who are actually involved in this Buddha yoga have perfected this one pointedness. But in some places, we see that this Buddha yoga is more or less just like a synonym for bhakti yoga. So if you look at point number 8 down there, Buddha yoga is a symptom for bhakti yoga or karma yoga. So sometimes we hear Buddha yoga just described as simply the yoga of intelligent people. That's one way you could think about it. That Buddha yoga means people who are intelligent. Buddhi means intelligence, and yoga means mystic activity or union with the supreme. So this union that comes from that is enjoyed or activated by intelligent people. What is this? It's bhakti yoga. So it's just a synonym for bhakti yoga. And in this part of Bhagavad Gita, karma yoga also means the same thing. Beware that later on in Bhagavad Gita, karma yoga does not necessarily mean the same thing. That's one of those things that confused me for a long time about the Bhagavad Gita, that these words are sometimes used in different contexts. So um, now the verse that we just read, Bhagavad Gita 10:10, brings us to try to understand this idea that Buddha yoga also means bhakti yoga, but beyond karma or fruit of activity. So in that sense, this is true deep bhakti yoga or Buddha yoga. When someone has perfected bhakti yoga and they are no longer engaged in any kind of material activities, when a person has done that perfection, and they're no longer engaged in material activities, then they're said to be in Buddha yoga. So this is interesting. This is something that I didn't actually pick up on before I started to kind of look over this verse for today's class. It's nice. You're all there's whatever it is. You're always learning new things in the Bhagavad Gita. I had never focused in that this Buddha yoga has a special meaning. It also has a general meaning. The general meaning, of course, is that it's just like Bhakti yoga. But the special meaning that Buddha yoga has, especially in the 10th chapter, the 10th verse, means that when a person has finally finished with trying to do any kind of material activities, any kind of karma or jnana or yogic activities, when a person is finally finished with those, then they're totally focused on Krishna because there's nothing else to focus on. They're totally focused on Krishna. And when they're totally focused on Krishna, they are in what's called Buddha yoga. Krishna uses this uh, label for that state of affairs. When a person becomes completely purified and completely focused in Krishna consciousness, where they're no longer at all interested in doing any kind of karmic activities for their own material benefit. They're no longer interested in speculating about things that, reading various things or hearing from various philosophers. They only want to please Krishna, and they only want to hear about Krishna's philosophy. So such people, when they've given up this tendency for any kind of material gratification or activities directed towards material gratification, they've given up any kind of activities directed for speculation, and they've given up any activities for some kind of yoga mystic realization or yogic mystic powers. When they've given up all those things have been given up, then they are situated in what Krishna calls Buddhi Yoga. So Buddhi Yoga also has this special meaning that this is like what we would maybe otherwise call, um, uh, not sadhana bhakti anymore, but raganuga bhakti. We are past the layer or the stages of sadhana, and now we are fully engaged in Krishna consciousness. So this is where this particular idea ties in to this one-pointedness, vyavasayatmaka buddhi, akeha kurunandana. By the way, just to kind of finish out this little um, uh, explanation here, um, Buddha Yoga is, rather, Sankhya Yoga is not the philosophy of the atheist Kapila. Prabhupada explains that in the purport, that I think about 1,500 years ago or such, something like that, there was an atheist and his name was Kapila. And way before this atheist Kapila lived, many thousands and thousands of years before, there was the Supreme Lord, who was also named Kapila-dev. So Kapila-dev was the son of Kardam Muni and Devahuti, and he was directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we see in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, from chapter 25 to chapter 33, they're the teachings of Kapila-dev to his mother. So here we have Kapila-dev, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we have his mother, who is actually being trained by Kapila-dev in what's known in Sanskrit as Sankhya philosophy. Now, generally, when we talk about Sankhya philosophy, the specific, very specific meaning of Sankhya philosophy is a discussion of 24 elements. There are five knowledge acquiring senses, five working senses, five gross material elements, and five subtle sense objects. Then there are three subtle material elements: mind, intelligence, and false ego, and finally the soul. And these 24 things taken all together are called Sankhya philosophy. But Prabhupada wants to point out in the purports, in the verses starting with verse 39, we have Prabhupada talking about um, the Sankhya of not this particular thing. Krishna explains the full Sankhya philosophy in Bhagavatam in third canto from verse 25 to 33. But what we're talking about here is not that. What we're talking about here is just Krishna describes the difference between the body and the soul, which is the Sankhya of the Bhagavad-gita. It's a kind of different version of it, a shortened version of it. Not all the full explanation is there. So This was the Sankhya that we just finished, and this is what's being now moved aside. And now we're talking not about Sankhya, but we're talking about um, the Buddhi Yoga, as we were mentioning. So let's go on here. We've talked about now um, this Sankhya Yoga and Buddhi Yoga. We've talked about the different kinds of Sankhya, the full version of it that Kapila Dev preaches in Bhagavatam, and we talked about now the uh, different versions of and the version of Sankhya Yoga which he teaches in the Bhagavad-gita, which is a shorter version where he just talks mostly about the difference between the body and the soul. And we see that in spiritual life, usually we begin by discussing the difference between the body and the soul. Spiritual life starts with that basic understanding. So now that that basic understanding is gotten, then we move on. And here we've moved on to Buddhi Yoga, and we've been talking about how Buddhi Yoga is, in general, the idea of bhakti, but in specific, in especially the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we talk about Buddhi meaning that state where one is totally focused on serving the Supreme Lord and is not interested anymore in any kind of other activity. So they're one pointed in attention, which is what this chapter is about. They're one pointed in attention. So here, this kind of is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 10:10. In this verse, the word Buddhi Yogam is very significant. We may remember that in the second chapter, the Lord instructing Arjuna said that he had spoken to him of many things and that he would instruct him in the way of Buddhi Yoga. So Prabhupada is referring in the purport of 10:10 to the purport of 241, where we are today. Now, Buddhi Yoga is explained. Buddhi Yoga itself is action in Krishna consciousness. That's the general meaning. It's action in Krishna consciousness. That is the highest intelligence. Buddhi means intelligence. Yoga means mystic activities or mystic elevation. When one tries to go back home, back to Godhead, and takes fully to Krishna consciousness and devotional service, his action is called Buddhi Yoga. In other words, Buddhi Yoga is the process by which one gets out of the entanglement of the material world. The ultimate goal of progress is Krishna. People do not know this. Therefore, the association of devotees and a bona fide spiritual master are important. One should know that the goal is Krishna, and when the goal is assigned and the path is slowly but progressively traversed, the ultimate goal is achieved. When a person knows the goal of life but is addicted to fruitive activities, he is acting in karma yoga. When he knows the goal is Krishna, but he takes pleasure in mental speculation to understand Krishna, he is acting in Jnana Yoga. And when he knows the goal and seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness and devotional service, he is acting in Bhakti Yoga or Buddhi Yoga, which is the complete yoga. This complete yoga is the highest perfectional stage of life. So here Prabhupada is explaining what I just said a minute ago. That the general meaning of Buddhi Yoga is Krishna consciousness or focusing on the Supreme Lord. But a very specific meaning of Buddhi Yoga is this yoga which is done with karma jnana and, of course, also Astanga Yoga as well. So this is the more specific meaning, and it shows that one has elevated themselves to a very, very high standard of Krishna consciousness. Now, let me ask at this point if anyone has any questions about any of that that we just went over. Okay. So
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
let
This is
me
Gail.
move on here then.
Marge, I think Gail has a question.
Oh, wait a minute. I had my I had my volumes turned down for everybody else. I'm sorry. Someone did have a question.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can hear. I when I have my volume turned up, I get a feedback of whatever I say twice, So I turn it down and then I forget that that also means I can't hear people from the outside. in, so that's why I wasn't able to hear. Okay, so what was your question?
Yeah, I just want to confirm my understanding because some things are a little blurry, fuzzy. Uh, so, one of the things I want to confirm is that um, it seems that to implement Buddhi yoga properly, a person has to have a grasp on the Sankhya philosophy. You have to understand the distinction between matter and spirit, the distinction between body and soul, to be able to um, do Buddhi yoga, you
Mm,
know, right? That's a
yeah.
fair statement, right?
Well, it's a little more nuanced than that. As Prabhupada even mentions in the purport, in 1010, he says that someone may not be able to understand all this philosophy, but if they work uh, for Krishna, then they will be able to eventually reach the goal anyway. So generally, we say that it is necessary, but it is also possible if someone has some disability of some kind that they can still make progress. We can look at that in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita if you're interested. But was that just a preface or that was your question?
um, well, that's one of my questions. So you're saying, therefore, that even if a person doesn't get the philosophy of Sankhya, um,
Mhm.
because a person is performing devotional service, Krishna will reciprocate by progressing them on the path.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another question I have is it's not that I want you to repeat the whole class, but
Right.
um, what what are the? I think you said that there is different. Is it different levels of Sankhya?
Yeah. Not different really levels, but different, I could say, probably a better way to phrase it is there's different completeness of the whole structure of Sankhya. We can talk about the entire thing, or we can talk about just one segment of it.
Uh-huh. Maybe there was also. Did you also say that there was different levels of Buddhi yoga?
Well, right. Uh, I could say there are kind of different definitions. That's kind of the better way to think about it. That one definition is a general definition of Buddha Yoga. And by general, it means that we have um, this idea that uh, it's just sort of plain vanilla devotional service, nothing other than devotional service. That's what Prabhupada said in one paragraph. And then in a later paragraph on 1010, Prabhupada describes it as a special type of devotional service, a type where someone has eliminated all vestiges of karma and jnana and astanga. When they've eliminated that, then Buddha yoga in that sense means kind of like perfected devotional service. Does that make sense? Is that clear enough?
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like, there's Buddha yoga that's on the level of mixed devotional service, and
Right,
the Buddha yoga that's pure, unadulterated.
right. So you just have to be aware of what context. So sometimes Krishna and Arjuna or Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta or any of our acharyas, when they say bhakti yoga, I mean, when they say Buddha yoga, sometimes they're just referring to Krishna consciousness in a general, simple way. Other times they may be speaking specifically about this kind of elevated state, which is a purified version of bhakti yoga. Okay.
Okay, just one last thing. Is there ever a time when bhakti yoga and Buddha yoga are not interchangeable?
No, as far as I know. Now, when you talk about karma yoga, yes. But when you talk about Buddha yoga, I Buddha yoga is not a term that really gets thrown around a lot in the Vedic literatures. I've read a lot of different things, and the only two places I've run across it is in this, second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and in the fourth, I'm sorry, in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. You almost never see it discussed. Sometimes buddhi is discussed, not buddhi yoga, but just buddhi, meaning intelligence, which is a whole other concept. It's related, of course, but it's not the same thing. And this particular concept of buddhi yoga is not discussed quite often. It's rarely discussed. However, karma yoga, you see that everywhere, and it's used in many different contexts. I don't want to get into that whole thing because I've discussed that quite often. What that karma yoga in one context means devotional service, and karma yoga in another context means actual fruit of activity, which is a very different thing. And karma yoga in yet another context means devotional service mixed with karma. So it depends on the context. So that one has a wide, range of things. But Buddha yoga is used very infrequently, and it always means devotional service in some sense or another, either the high perfected kind or just a basic kind of Krishna consciousness or devotional service.
And Buddhi itself, just the word Buddhi, doesn't that really refer to spiritual intelligence versus, a more just generic intelligence?
Yeah, generally it does. But if you read like the Mahabharata or various other Vedic literatures, you see it has a wider application. You know, um, Even the word Atma, sometimes it means soul, but it can also mean the body. In certain contexts. So you just have to be aware of that. That some Sanskrit words are not just technical terms, but they have a kind of everyday meaning that gets thrown around in everyday situations, which is certainly not the same as their, metaphysical, technical use that when someone is specifically discussing philosophy would use.
Okay, Maharaj, thank you so much.
Okay. So here, I just wanted to point out this is where Prabhupada described that we were just talking about. A person may have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organization, but if he still is not intelligent enough, so maybe they haven't gotten Sankhya down, if they're not intelligent to make progress, then Krishna from within gives him instruction so that he may ultimately come to him without difficulty. The qualification is that a person always engage himself in Krishna consciousness with love and devotion and render all kinds of services. He should perform some sort of work for Krishna, and that work should be with love. If a devotee is not intelligent enough to make progress in the path of self realization, but is sincere and devoted to the activities of devotional service, the Lord gives him a chance to make progress and ultimately to attain to him. So that's 10:10, the end of the purport in Bhagavad Gita 10:10. So it's not just a brain game, Spiritual life certainly requires a fundamental knowledge of what devotion is. But if someone's intellectual, then they can apply their intellect to understanding Sankhya and all these details. And then that helps them both with understanding how to clearly engage in devotional service, and it gives them encouragement and a kind of focus of attention that helps. But if someone's not very intellectual, that doesn't leave them out in the cold in devotional activity. They can still make progress too, and they make progress by just engaging in devotional service. And then within their heart, this is what the next verse, Teshu evanukam partam aham agyanam tamaha. This is this verse, Teshem evanukam partam aham agyana jam tamaha nasayami atma bhavasto jnana dipenya bhasvata. That to show special mercy, I, dwelling in their heart, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So, as Prabhupada was saying at the end of the purport in the previous verse, that Krishna still helps even if someone is not particularly philosophically gifted. So if you can understand Sankhya, then it will help you. But if you're not particularly philosophically inclined, you can still make progress, but you have to constantly engage in service. All right. So, does anybody else out there have a quick question before I move into the second part of my explanation here? Okay, good. So let me go back to my. In this verse, in the purport, Prabhupada talks about faith. This is kind of at the bottom of this verse.
Marge, your sound. We Marge, we lost your sound,
You did.
but now it's back.
It's back. Okay. Okay. So you can hear me again. You still hear me?
Yes, Marge.
Okay.
When you put up this recent slide about that is about at that time we stopped hearing you. So it was maybe 20 seconds.
Yeah, I'm hoping there isn't some kind of issue going on here. This happened in a Subba meeting about 2 weeks ago where suddenly my sound went out. I could hear myself and I could see all the meters moving, but nobody else could hear me and I couldn't figure
It
it out.
showed a bad connection on your side, Maharaj. So I think it was not sound problem, just connection.
Uh-huh. Well, all right. So anyway, let me move on here. Um, here is this, you know, it's about the very first paragraph of the purport to 241, the verse that we're discussing today. Um, Shabda Shabde Vishvasakahe Sudhrida Nishchaya Krishna Bhakti Kaila Sarva Karma Krita Hai. Shraddha is confident, firm faith that by rendering transcendental loving service to Krishna, one automatically performs all subsidiary activities. Such faith is favorable to the discharge of devotional service. So, the first thing that Prabhupada talks about with this Vyavasayatmaka Buddhi verse is this Shraddha. Shraddha means faith. And reading a little deeper here in the later part of the purport, faith means unflinching trust in something sublime. When one is engaged in the duties of Krishna consciousness, he need not act in relationship to to the material world with obligations to family, traditions, humanity, or nationality. Fruitive activities are the engagements of one's reactions from past good or bad deeds. When one is awake in Krishna consciousness, he need no longer endeavor for good results in his activities. When one is situated in Krishna consciousness, all activities are on the absolute plane, for they are no longer subject to dualities like good and bad. The highest perfection of Krishna consciousness is renunciation of the material conception of life. This state is automatically achieved by progressive Krishna consciousness. So, besides this idea that we are moving to full Buddhi yoga by giving up karma and jnana, we also see this element of faith that one is more and more focused on Krishna. So when we are more and more focused on Krishna, then naturally everything becomes fully, uh, connected, and it's a natural process. Faith means not only that we kind of know something, but not the whole thing. So if somebody knows absolutely something, then when they act according to that knowledge, then that's not faith. But if they only know something, but they don't know for sure, and they act, then there's an element of faith. But in Sanskrit, the word shraddha also indicates that a person has a focus on something, not just that they may be carrying some weight of doubt in relationship to that thing, but also that they are focused around that thing. That's something that we generally do not associate with faith in Western world. Usually faith just means that uh, we have faith that there is a God. We haven't seen him or touched him or had a direct experience, but we have faith that there is a God. Um, but in Sanskrit, the Shraddha word more also encompasses the idea of actually focusing, not that we just are aware or have faith that God exists, but also that we are willing to focus our lives on God, not just have some metaphysical uh, uh, bite of knowledge in the back of our brain somewhere, some theoretical idea that God exists. Okay, we're down with that. We're happy with that, but not just that. Faith in the Sanskrit sense indicates that we also are willing to build our whole lives around that realization that God exists, that there's a focus. So the more that we can actually build our lives around the Supreme, then that means we have greater faith. And that means that we're also going to get deeper realization. And that also means that we have vyabhasayatmaka buddhi, or one-pointed attention, one-pointed attention. And it also means that we're on our way to Buddhi Yoga. So all these things are connected by constantly focusing on the Supreme. We will become, uh, we will believe in the Supreme. We will become purified by that focus. And eventually, we will lose interest in anything outside the Supreme. So that's the nature of this one pointed attention. So this is those who are on this path are resolute in purpose. So this means those who are following the path of bhakti yoga or Buddha yoga, if you want to call it that, those who are on that path, they're resolute in purpose and their aim is one. So uh, Vyavasayatmaka means focused. Buddhir means intelligence. Akeha means one. It's focused as a one pointed. So akeha. So contrasting that, we have bahu shaka. Bahu means many. Shaka means branches. So those who are in high devotional service, their intelligence is very single pointed. It is very single pointed. And those who still have some distance to go, it is Bahu Shaka. And those who are not interested in spiritual life at all, they're really Bahu Shaka. They're really all over the place. They have so many things that they might think or might be focused on. So to follow on, I'm going to go a little bit further here. We say bhakti is done only to serve Krishna. Okay, though we say it, how deep does it really go? How much do we live by the idea of everything for Krishna? We still do many fruitive acts because we think they are necessary for our happiness. We have been engaged in fruitive action or karma for countless lifetimes. So this is why just knowing that we want to focus only on Krishna, that's a good start. And that's where we have to begin. But it's far from the final stages. We're still, even though we know better, we're still to some extent engaged in karmic activity. And that, of course, is called karma mishra bhakti. So our bhakti is mishra, or mixed with karma. It might also be mixed with jnana, and it might also be mixed with Astanga yoga. So this means that we still have some way to go. And that's all right. That's the way spiritual life starts. We start on a kind of not very purified version of Krishna consciousness. So we move from unpurified Krishna consciousness to purified Krishna consciousness. So purified Krishna consciousness is called unalloyed bhakti. That's the word that Prabhupada used to use for it. Alloy is a mixture of metals. So brass, for instance, is an alloy. It's a mixture of metals. But when you have a pure metal like gold, it's not mixed with anything else. So therefore, it's a pure metal. And in Sanskrit, this is usually, mentioned by the term Shuddha Bhakti or pure Bhakti. So Bhakti may be already pure or it may not be already pure. But when we continue to perform devotional service and we avoid offenses, in short time, we will come to be purified of heart and our bhakti will become more and more purified. We won't have so much of a tendency for karma or jnana, much less for sinful activities. So when a person finally lets go of all this karma, jnana, and astanga yoga, then that is what we call Shuddha Bhakti or purified bhakti. So this Burijan puts in his surrender unto me, his tika or his explanation of Bhagavad Gita. Uh, the whole matter is concluded in Bhagavad Gita 241. So this refers to the verse that we're dealing with as Vyavasayatmika Buddhi or absolute path of perfection. Sri Baladev Vijabhushana, a great Vaishnava scholar, defines this as Bhagavad Archana Rupaika Nishkama Karma Bhir Vishuddha Chittaha, accepting transcendental loving service to the Lord as the prime duty, free from fruitive reaction. So Maharaj Pariksit was perfectly right when he firmly accepted the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, renouncing all karma khandiya conceptions of life. So this is taken from a purport too. I don't remember exactly which purport this comes from. Burijan makes reference here when he talks about the surrender unto me, his explanation of Bhagavad Gita. All right, so let me move here one more point to the tree of desire. This is my last point, basically. Um, we all have desires. It's impossible to live without having desires. Uh, every living being has some kind of desire. And with that kind of desire, the living being has a particular karmic trajectory through the material universe. We desire one thing, we go in one way. We desire something else, we go in another way. But everybody has some kind of desire. It's impossible not to have desires. So one of the things that's very important is that these desires often are not focused. So Krishna is talking about having a one-pointed desire. So if a person has a one-pointed desire, um, that's a very special person. Most people are not one-pointed, not even close. So we have many desires, and these desires overlap and sometimes conflict with one another. Uh, we decide we want to change what we eat for our health, but then we're attracted by eating things that are bad for us and we go back and forth. Sometimes people want to give up smoking, but at the same time, they're very addicted to it. So they give it up and then they, you know, take it up again. You know, Mark Twain famously said that it's very easy to give up smoking. I know I've done it many times. So, at any rate, um, no one can follow all their desires. You have to follow some and let go of others. There's no possibility of following every one of your desires. Usually, what people do is they focus on the most immediate and the most tantalizing or the most uh, tintillating sensual experiences when faced with a choice between a cerebral future benefit desire and an immediate personal gratification desire. Usually, hands down, the immediate sense gratification wins out. You know, we don't, it's not much of a contest for most people. You know, they have some long term goal, which is in the future, and oftentimes some little immediate gratification comes down the pipeline, and we immediately forget about the long term goal and we go for the immediate thing. So, life is full of situations where we sometimes have to sacrifice little pleasures so that we have a greater pleasure. People commonly do this in certain ways. Of course, when you work or you go to school, you're doing things that you certainly would not be doing if you didn't have another purpose, you know. So going to school, it's difficult, it's sometimes boring, it's sometimes stressful. You have to engage in all these different activities, but we do it because we know at the end with the diploma, we're going to get some kind of situation in the world that we would not have been able to get if we didn't go to school. So we put aside the desire to just kind of hang out and do whatever we feel like, you know, watch a bunch of television or sit around and throw rocks into a pond or something like that. You know, these kind of things that don't require any effort. But we give that up because we have a future goal. This is called Shreyas and Preyas. So there's immediate gratification and long term gratification. And most people can handle a little bit of that. You know, when you go to work, normally people are not, you know, head over their heels uh, in expectation and anticipation of going to work. People go to work because they have to, and they make some money. That's the real goal of the work. While they're at work, usually they're stressed out, bored, they're overtaxed, they're frustrated. All these things are a part of most kinds of work, but people put up with that. They put up with all these negative things because there's a larger goal. So most people can sacrifice some short-term goals for larger goals like going to school or going to work. There's some people who can't even do that, you know, that they're whatever comes down in the moment is far more interesting to them than some future mentally accepted goal. So people who are like that, people who simply do whatever is right in front of them, such people usually don't wind up with any kind of direction in life because they're like a cork in the ocean, just bobbing around whichever the wave goes. If the wave goes one way, then they go that way. If the wave goes another way, then they go the other way. So such people don't have any kind of focus. Those people who at least are able to focus around a personal chosen goal, such people have fewer things bobbing them around. They have their main goal that they're working for. And so they focus in on that. But then they do take some time off, et cetera, et cetera. But even these people have no idea what's worth having as a goal, because you can become famous, you can become wealthy, you can move up the hierarchy on a particular um, corporation's, management list. You can become well known, well placed. You can create a name for yourself in academia or in science or something like that. But these things do require a close to one pointed focus, but these things are in the ultimate uh, useless. They don't really give us anything that's will help us in the long run. However, someone who actually makes Krishna the center, such a person is on the right track. They are doing the one thing that actually will make a difference for their, not just this life, but all lives. This is something that will take you out of the material world if you just become one pointed. And so that's why in Krishna consciousness, we learn how to be one pointed. We do it in kind of a sneaky way, though. We don't just do the same thing over and over again all day long. We have 9 types of devotional service. So we are doing some kind of devotional service, but we switch from one kind to another. And in this way, it's much more easy to constantly be in service, not the same service, but we are in service throughout the course of the day. And as we become more and more Krishna conscious, in the long run, we will become uh, as this verse is saying, one pointed, but not one pointed for material development, not one pointed to make a political name for ourselves, not one pointed to become, well known or wealthy or whatever it is, but one pointed to serve God, which is actually what will make us happy. All right. So, any questions or realizations about?
Yes. Yes, Maharaj, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Okay, thank
Loud.
you. Yeah, so, well, on the materials, for those who have the more focused mindset, or the, as we're referring to the verse, the one-pointed intelligence, when they're able to focus their intelligence just getting something, and they use their mind as a tool to navigate around and like that accomplish one thing. And the material, when it's done for material reasons, typically, of course, it's rare materially to be able to do that, because the goal, as you described, is a goal that provides non-permanent satisfaction. But also, it seems that it's rare because there's various, because one's attracted to something that's temporary, naturally, that means that there's a tendency to be attracted to short-term happiness over long-term happiness, period. And so, and of course, in the material world, there's unlimited types of short-term happiness that's available. So on the one hand, I was wondering if you could say something about how it works that people with apparently, one focus, or probably we say more very focused, not say one focus, because it's so rare to have someone like single pointed focus for a material goal. but who are very focused in a way, how it is that they tend to lose that, most persons, after a period of time. But then to compare and contrast, then again for devotees too, while a pure devotee, his intelligence, as the verse said, is one pointed. He's just focused on the goal of Krishna consciousness. And so he's always thinking about Krishna. His goal is Krishna, nothing can sway him. But how is it then that many persons on the devotional path who may get some semblance of having a one-pointed intelligence, but many of them, or we could say majority, at least given how many people start from a lower platform, how they lose that focus. So on the one hand, we say materialists, they lose it, but those who are practitioners of devotional service, there's a tendency for them to lose it too. So I was wondering if you could compare and contrast and give examples. And I'm sorry, it's such a broad question, and it's also two questions in one.
Well, I understood the one question that why is it that devotees sometimes also lose their focus? And this is down to one simple factor, and that is
Yeah,
offense.
I asked
Yeah. So through
my
making,
question.
I'm hearing something in the background. Somebody. Okay. So a person who is in devotional service, when they make offenses to others, Krishna removes the taste for devotional service. Then the devotee has to really animate themselves to stay focused in devotional service. It's much harder. When you have a taste, then things go smoothly and you find yourself effortlessly engaging in various kinds of devotional activity. But when you lose the taste, you find that devotional service becomes like um, a grind. We feel we have to get up. Now we have to go to Mangalarti. Now we have to read something. Now we have to do something else, you know. So this is very hard to keep up for any length of time. And the reason it happens is because the devotee has lost the taste for devotional service. We, it's very hard for any of us to continue when there's no taste. And the reason a devotee has lost taste is because the devotee has become offensive, either to the Supreme Lord or more likely to his god brothers and god sisters. When people make offenses, Krishna doesn't look upon that very kindly. And he doesn't want someone to create problems for other devotees. So Krishna arranges to remove that person from the society of devotees. And the way Krishna does it is by giving them uh, less and less and less of a taste. And then the person thinks, why am I doing this? I could be making money. I could be doing something with my life. These people are all knuckleheads, they don't know anything. And I think that, the people out there in the regular world, they're noble and they're doing good things. Why am I wasting my time here? And then the person just leaves devotional service. This is the way it happens. And the reason it happens again is because a person has made offenses against devotees. There are 10 offenses listed in the Padma Puran. And so we have to be on guard that we're not making offenses. If we engage in devotional service and we're not making offenses, then very soon we will become more and more liberated from our material background, our material past. I certainly have. I feel that so much. I actually just feel that in phases too, as the years go on, that there are certain elements from my past that are no longer a part of my consciousness. They've left. There's still plenty to go, no doubt, but the process of Krishna consciousness has definitely had its effect on me. So that's why, along with engaging in devotional service and trying to understand what devotional service is, we have to be aware of offenses and make an effort to avoid them, because if we don't, we'll eventually find ourselves struggling. And this is why devotees, you know, veer off the track and wind up, doing something else. Um, for materialists, they go for some kind of material desire. Their focus is that, and basically every materialist is after really one thing, and that is material happiness. And so their idea of what is exactly material happiness may shift over time. So they may be working for one thing, and after a while, with enough frustration and enough, anxiety for that thing, they will eventually shift their, sights onto some other topic, and then what they were spending enormous amount of time before is no longer on their list of to-dos. They've now moved on to something else. So that kind of thing can happen. And of course, with those who are not in devotional service, there's the ever-present danger of becoming a shipwreck. You get involved in some kind of deeply sinful activity, and that wrecks your life. You become involved in sex life. Uh, you become involved in intoxication of some kind or another. You become involved in some illegal activity. You become involved in some kind of, gambling or something like that. And many people ruin their lives that way. They were headed towards something, but because they weren't able to control themselves, they wound up, becoming a shipwreck. It happens to a lot of people. It's amazing, actually, if you read the stories about various famous people, musicians and actors and actresses and so on and so forth. You'll read how many of them have gone through some addiction issue or some kind of hellish divorce or some kind of other issue that basically laid their entire life low. Although they had money and they had great prestige in society, they had that issue. So um, I'm not sure if I answered all your questions or not, because it wasn't clear to me what the two questions were exactly.
Oh, well, that was good, Marish. Uh, I sort of, my question was a little bit broad, so it was open for you to, you know, choose the parts of it that, or focus on the parts of it that inspired you to make a response, and it was very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
Maraj, there's a someone, Subi has a question, a follow up. So if there, you're describing how there's 10 offenses, particularly to the holy name, particularly the offense to the devotees of Krishna, and these are things that make these offenses cause one to lose taste for Krishna consciousness, and thus give up Krishna consciousness, or to an extent give it up. And so Subi asks, what's the remedy? What does, if one wants to be more Krishna conscious and solve the problem, what should be done?
Um, well, first of all, one has to be aware of what the offenses are. If you don't know what they are, then there's not going to be much impetus to give them up, because you aren't even aware that you're committing them. So they're listed in many places in Prabhupada's books. So the first step, I would say, would be to make yourself aware of what these offenses are. And if you do that, then you can begin to try to get rid of them from your life. And we should always be aware that if we do not get rid of them, they will get rid of us. So it's just like that, you know. It's like if you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean and it starts leaking water, you can't just pretend that things will be all right. And if you just row faster or turn up the engines or turn the sails into the wind, that you'll be okay. You've got to do something about the fact that the boat is sinking, because if the boat gets too much water, it's all over. And it's the same thing with offenses. Um, it's in some cases, I think probably the most common offense is the first one, the tendency to blaspheme the devotees who've dedicated their lives for propagating the holy name of the Lord. So we say bad things about devotees. And when we do, we become implicated in an offense. And so we have to be aware that we're doing this and, try to offer our apologies and try to serve the devotees and try to eliminate that tendency from our consciousness. If we don't, it will have its effect on us. And it will create that situation that I've just talked about, that loss of the taste in doing devotional service. So no one can continue doing anything when they have no taste for it. And that's why when Krishna removes the taste, people, the only recourse they can see is to leave devotional service. So it's not difficult. All we have to do is try to make amends for our offenses and try to give up making more offenses. And in this way, we will maybe have some um, issues in the progress of our devotional life, but we won't zigzag in and out of devotional service. Those who make no effort to limit their offenses, such devotees will wind up zigzagging in and out of devotional service. That's why that happens. Chant, be aware of the offenses, avoid them, and make up for them if they're the kind of offenses that you can make up for. That's how I would reply.
Uh, One tiny question. I'm here, Naga.
Okay.
So I'm just sharing my doubt. So if you refer to chapter 3 in Gita, it says that it's not us who's actually doing the karma. It is the three gunas of the nature that make us do the karma. And it is in the ahankara, that is our own ego, we think we are doing the karma. So
Right.
what we actually can do is we are just a witness of everything going on. You're just a witness. So if
Um,
I'm a witness, then how come we are committing that offense? It's not us, right? It is the three gunas of nature that are making us do the offense. So if we are not doing the offense, why should be thrown out?
mhm. It's a little more nuanced than that. There actually are three doers. There's the self, the Supreme Lord, and material nature. So the Atma or the Jiva, the Prakriti, and the Ishvara, the Supreme Lord. All three are doers, but they're doers in a different sense. Um, we are doers in one way. The Supreme Lord is a doer in a different way. And Prakriti or material nature is a doer in yet another way. So the Supreme Lord is a doer in the sense that nothing can get done without his uh, okay and without his empowerment. That's why it's described that Krishna is upadrastanumantas cha. He is overseer and permitter. If it exists, it's because Krishna allowed it to exist. If it happens, it's because Krishna allowed it to happen. If it was thought of, it's because Krishna thought of it first. Whatever comes down the line is coming from Krishna. So, in one sense, he's the absolute doer. But yet, he has transferred to us a small piece of his unlimited free will. We have free will, but we have limited free will. And our free will amounts to one thing and one thing only, and that is that we are free to desire anything that we want. That's where our free will starts, and that's where our free will ends. We can desire anything. We can desire things that are good for us. We can desire things that are bad for us. We can desire things that are good for others. We can desire things that are bad for others. We can desire things that will help the world. We can desire things that will ruin the world. We can desire against our own desires, even, which we talked about earlier, so we can desire anything. We can desire things that are easy. We can desire things that are difficult. We can desire things that are impossible. We can desire anything. What happens next is up to the Supreme Lord.
So
So,
could we say, sorry
we
to
are
interrupt.
therefore
Okay.
sometimes allowing our desires to connect with reality, that what we plan and what we desire is going to actually connect with the outside world, and it will come to pass, at least in some way. It may not come to pass in the manner that we hoped it would, but it will come to be in some way or another. So this is the kind of thing that we have. So the Supreme Lord is the doer in the ultimate sense. Nothing happens without his final sanction, and all energies come from him. All ideas come from him. Then material nature is a doer, but a doer in a different sense. The material nature is that material world all around us, the environment, that responds to our senses, our input senses and our output senses. We have Gyanindriya, which are senses that take in information, and we have Karmindriya, which are senses that act in the external world. So when we want to move our senses, either to see, hear, touch, or smell something, or to lift, walk, talk, or create progeny, these senses are activated by the Supreme Lord. So even our body is external to us, what to speak of the external material world. The Supreme Lord reads the desire in our heart. He reads the desire in our heart, and he either allows that thing to take place or not. And many times when the Supreme Lord sees that the living entity is going to do something sinful or something detrimental, the Supreme Lord will not allow that activity to easily happen. The Supreme Lord will try to block that activity from the living entity. But if the living entity persists in a wrong course of action, eventually the Supreme Lord will no longer interfere with that desire. So, because the Lord is no longer interfering with the desire of the individual living entity, and the living entity wants something sinful, something detrimental, then the Supreme Lord says, all right, you want this? Well, go for it. But you have to bear the blowback. You have to bear the responsibility. So we're the doer in the sense of the desirer. So it was our desire that caused a particular situation to occur in the material world. And therefore, we're responsible for that, not material nature and not the Supreme Lord. That's the whole nature of the game here. We are living in a material world. It's designed um, with the whole karmic system in place. The karmic system is the system that takes a look at and records what it is that the living entities desire and what the living entities wind up actually accomplishing in the external world. And then there are reactions that come from those various things. If the things that the living entity wanted were sinful, then the living entity gets vikarma or bad karma as a result of the living entity's sinful actions. If the living entity wanted something pious, then the living entity gets good future results from his punya, his good karma that he indicated or wanted or acted on. And in this way, it works. Um, the living entity cannot simply wash his hands and say that it was material nature that did it. In one sense, that's true, but material nature would not have acted on its own. And the Supreme Lord certainly has no desire to visit um, sinful life in the abilities of the living entity. But if the living entity wants sinful life badly enough and continues to think of and ask for the enactment of sinful things, eventually the Supreme Lord will not interfere with that wrong decision. And then the living entity will be forced to accept the consequences of that wrong decision. So uh, the living entity, although he cannot do anything, not even lift a tiny finger or blink an eye, he cannot even say a single word or breathe a single breath if the Supreme Lord doesn't empower it. But the Supreme Lord generally empowers by allowing material nature to work. But why does he do it? He does it on the basis of the desire of the living entity. So the desire of the living entity is the key factor. By our desire, we either rise or we fall. If we desire the wrong things, eventually we do the wrong things. And when we do the wrong things, the karmic system goes into gear, you know, like that American television program, Dragnet. You know, when someone breaks the law, I go to work. My name is Joe Friday. So bum 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 bum.
Uh,
So that's the
so
nature of the
one short thing, just time.
well,
So
yeah,
here we said the desire is under
great
control of
power
Krishna or
over
the material
law,
nature.
what the living entity wants. But it's based on the desire of the living entity. And the desires of the living entity is responsible for. So if we desire the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing. If we do the wrong thing, we get karmic blowback for it. And then we have to deal with that. And we can't point the finger at anyone else, much less the Supreme Lord or material nature.
One short thing. So this is based that the desire is under our control. But I think the desire is under the control of the material nature. How did the doership of the desire get transferred to self? Because we constantly say that even the desire is under the control of material nature. So how did the karma, I mean the doership, the agency, get transferred from material nature to the self? How did that happen?
How to say that last sentence again?
Yeah. So the agency of doership for creating desire, producing desire, is also under the purview or the power of the material nature. But now we are saying that it gets transferred to the self, that is the person. So the influence of producing the desire is transferring from material nature to the self, the person. How did that happen?
Material nature is neutral. It neither wants us to perform sin, nor does it stop us from performing sin. Material nature is neutral. It neither impels us to sinful activity, nor does it make sinful activity impossible. It does neither. We're the ones that can desire. However, you have touched on a point that is an important aspect that is involved here, and that is the tendency of a living entity to commit the same sin over and over again. This is a tendency of the living entity, that once the living entity creates a sin in one way, then there's a tendency for that living entity to do that same sin a second, third, and fourth time. This is the mechanism of addiction. And this is described in second chapter of Bhagavad Gita in verse 62 or something like that, somewhere around in there, where we hear that the living entity, by contemplating the objects of the senses, one develops attachment. From attachment, lust develops. From lust, anger arises. From anger, delusion arises. From delusion, bewilderment of memory. And when memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and one falls into the material pool. So Krishna is not putting traps so that we will do the wrong thing, nor is he telling us to do the wrong thing. Material nature is not set up in such a way that we are forced to do the wrong thing. We do the wrong thing because we voluntarily choose it. And if we choose the wrong thing long enough, that wrong choice becomes second nature. It becomes a habit, or in common language in modern world, we call it addiction. We are addicted to something that is bad for us and maybe bad for others as well. And how did we get there? In some cases, a person has such a strong addiction, they can barely help themselves from doing the wrong thing, as heroin addicts or someone who's become a, you know, a well, degraded drinker, where they can't basically hold themselves back from taking another drink. So this kind of thing happens, and it is as if material nature is forcing the person to do the wrong thing. However, before a person became a helpless drunk, they were not a drunk. We don't start life that way. We start life with, at least for the most part, a ability to choose or to reject bad behavior for the most part. Now, there is a certain karma that goes from one lifetime to another, where a person is basically, in one sense, sort of predetermined to fall into a certain kind of ill behavior. Now, that does happen, but that's because of a previous life's bad behavior. So that's taken place as a result of something that happened in the previous life. So material nature doesn't independently decide anything. Material nature only moves when the Supreme Lord tells material nature to move. And the Supreme Lord reads the desire of the living entity and decides to respond to it, either to accept it or to block it. And if, again, as I said, the living entity wants to continually choose the wrong path, eventually the Lord allows the living entity to go down the wrong path, to choose activities which are self-harmful and other harmful. And then once they perform those harmful activities, then the second aspect of material nature kicks in, which is the karmic system, which is run by the demigod, particularly Dharmaraj, or the Lord of Death, Yama. So the material nature has machinery to it, and it has these demigods. And so therefore, like a game, like a computer game, we get merits and demerits. We get points and we lose points because we're playing the game skillfully or we're playing it poorly. And if we play it poorly, there's a tendency to continue to play it poorly and to get worse and worse until finally we've made so many wrong steps that we lose the chance to play the game. We die, or we get put in prison, or we go mad, or we become so addicted that our body can't function anymore. So these are examples of people who lost the game of having material body. They lost it by misuse, by sinful activity. But we can't point the finger at material nature. It wasn't material nature's fault. It wasn't Krishna's fault either. It was the fact that Krishna gives us free will, just like he has it himself, except for, as I said earlier, Krishna has unlimited free will. He can do anything. He's not restricted by anything or anyone. However, we have a limited free will, and that free will that we have is limited to we can choose what we desire. And that's why desire is everything. If we desire the right things, we will eventually do the right things and we will become gradually purified and leave the material. If we do the wrong things, we're able to do that. Krishna won't hamper us forever. But if we continue to persist in wanting and acting in the wrong way, then we will build up, you know, the karma, and we will have to suffer for what we did.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, sorry for, thank you for answering, but we are now over
Okay.
time, so we need like to move forward.
Okay. All right. So thank you all very much. Are you going to do a kirtan? Is that what you do now or what?
Sure.
I, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just wondering what
Yeah,
you.
Maharaj, sorry, Sasha wasn't sure if I was going to answer your question. Yes, please, Maharaj, if you please lead a brief Hare Krishna kirtan. And just, I know a couple persons left because we're running a little late. So, the kirtans, in case you're looking at your schedule, the kirtan will be like 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then we're done for the evening.
Okay.
But we'll look forward to have everyone again. And the way the kirtan works, for those who are, I guess most of you are familiar, but not everyone. So with these kirtans over Zoom, sometimes it doesn't feel quite as good as when you're in the same room as everyone, because due to the limitations of Zoom, the time in which one person is speaking on one end of the camera, and when you hear it on the other end, it's actually not the same time. So we only have the singer, the leader, be unmuted. All of us are muted. Otherwise, you'll get a cacophony. So, but to have the kirtan experience that does seem proximate to that of an in-person kirtan, I could only encourage you, well, to listen nicely to the kirtan, but also please feel free to join in despite that you're muted. And so the way to do that is when Maharaj sings one mantra, then we repeat in refrain, even if Maharaj is singing that time in refrain too, and then you'll have the same experience. So sorry for all the what seems like instructions, but Maharaj, please take it away.
Okay. Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Samin Iti Namine Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Samin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunabadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunabadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Nitai Gauda Haribo, 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 Nitai Gauda Haribo, Nitai Gauda Haribo, 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 Nitai Gauda Haribo. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. So thank you all for taking the time and listening in and asking some questions. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you all, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Um, for and for the rest of you, if you want to unmute yourself for a second, you can join me if you like in expressing appreciation to Maharaj, and thanks for his spending this evening with us, sharing a very organized and yet deep and thorough understanding of this part of the Bhagavad Gita. So here we go. Haribol!
Haribol,
Haribo,
Haribol,
Haribo. Thank you,
Haribol,
Maharaj.
Haribol.